Welcome to Back at the Movies, the podcast where we revisit our favorite Siskel and Ebert episodes.
Almost 50 years ago, two Chicago film critics, Gene Siskel.
I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And Roger Ebert.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times.
Were hired to discuss movies on a local PBS station. They were rivals and competitors.
Thumbs up, thumbs down is such an arbitrary thing anyway.
Not arbitrary.
And over 3 decades, they never missed a chance to let the other one know he was wrong.
I'm really surprised at you. You should be ashamed of yourself.
What,
First of all,
for not agreeing with you? I've never been ashamed of that. I've been proud of that.
Their passion for film made them television stars and helped pave the way for a generation of movie lovers, including your hosts, Dylan Wilcox and Miranda Broder. I'm your co-host, Dylan Wilcox, a movie buff who went from selling popcorn at the local movie theater to working in Hollywood.
And I'm your co-host, Miranda Broder, an English and film teacher living in the Bay Area. We've experienced so many movies together throughout the years, and so many discoveries were thanks to Siskel and Ebert.
We'll be reviewing the movies and the reviewers, discussing if the films hold up and if their opinions hold up, as we hope to discover and rediscover some gems along the way.
This is Back at the Movies, and the balcony is open. Dylan, should we sing 16 Candles at the beginning? 16
No, we just sing,
candles.
if you were here, I could leave you.
Okay.
Yeah,
Was that it?
I think we're starting. We're recording. This is it. Welcome to Back at the Movies, a very special episode we're doing in honor of the new Hulu documentary about the Brat Pack. We thought we'd mix it up a little bit, and rather than what we've been doing and talk about a specific episode of Siskel and Ebert, we'd do a little grab bag of different Brat Pack movies and their reviews. So these are going to be movie reviews from different time periods. It actually works out because these were not great weeks in the annals of movie history. But it's fascinating to hear what they had to say about these movies at the time. Double fascinating hearing what they said about them 40, that's right, 40 ye's later.
God.
And triple fascinating revisiting them now because I hadn't watched them in a few years, actually. And
How is it possible that it was 40 years ago when you and I are only 29?
I'm bad at math, so somehow the math works out that we're only 29 and these movies are so old. Okay, 16 Candles. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about this movie. I know this movie so well. Not only do I know, there are some movies like The Wizard of Oz where you know the sounds and the music cues and everything. I know not only this movie, but also the TV edit of this movie because I recorded it off of TV at the time. So yeah. I know when they do a really bad dub of Smart Alec instead of Smart Ass at the beginning of the movie.
Wait a second. How old were you when you first saw this movie?
Oh, God. I must have been 9 or 10 because...
Well, it came out in 84. So
it came out in 84. I did not see it in the theater. I definitely saw it on video. I definitely saw it around the time. I have a weird memory of this episode. I remember them reviewing this. And so I definitely saw the Siskel and Ebert episode at the time in 1984. This was May 1984. This was May 4th, to be specific. Yeah, so this was a touch-tone movie. I've seen it so many times. Sidebar, I wrote my senior thesis on teen movies specifically, so I'm attacking this movie and the ones we're talking about from a few different angles.
I remember reading your thesis. It was very good.
Oh, that's right. You read it.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. So I hadn't watched this movie in years, and then when Travis and I started dating, I said, I love this movie, let's watch it. And it went over like a lead balloon because it's really dated. Travis had never seen it, so he didn't have the affection, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's been 10 years since I've seen it, and let's hear Ebert intro it with 5.
16 Candles is a sweet, funny new comedy that begins with a big turning point in the life of a teenage girl, her 16th birthday, and everything's going to be different after today. Right? Not right. She's totally grossed out when everybody forgets her birthday. Not her stupid parents, they don't remember it. Her stupid sister, she doesn't remember it. Nobody remembers it. And there's no magic either on this great day. She feels just as insecure and inadequate today as when she was 15 yesterday. And her day doesn't get any better. Here's a scene from that evening at a high school dance. The girl played by Molly Ringwald has a crush on a good-looking senior boy, but who asked her to dance? A freshman known as the Geek.
All right, so here we'll play a little bit of the dialogue because they do talk about it.
I'm sort of saving myself. It's really stupid. He doesn't even know I exist.
Oh.
Jake Ryan.
You like Jake? Jake's my boy! I just talked to Jake in the gym. He asked me about you.
Did not.
He did too. He did. He asked me what you were like.
Oh my... Oh, if you're lying, I'll beat the crap out of you.
I'm not lying.
Oh my God, what should I do? Should I go up to him or should I say, hi, Jake, I'm Samantha? Or no, maybe I should let him come to me.
This is not my department, huh?
But what if I decide to let him come to me and then he forgets? Or then what if he changes his mind and then I'm totally screwed, right?
Apparently so.
Ebert continues his positive review in clip 6.
What's interesting about that scene is the basic choice that it makes. It starts out with him making a big pass at her and she shoves him away. But then instead of developing into a sleazy sex scene like something out of Porky's, this movie shows those two kids as insecure and vulnerable and able to be friends with each other. And that's the whole movie. That's the whole movie is like that. Instead of going for cheap laughs, it spends a lot of time observing exactly how a teenage girl sees the world and how the world sees her. At the end of the movie, you've laughed a lot. But this is interesting. You're not ashamed of what you laughed at. 16 Candles remembers what it was like to be young and serious and very romantic.
Miranda, I know you've seen this movie before. What was it like revisiting it?
Yeah, I've seen it tons of times. I'm like you. I can pretty much, recite it from memory. I really loved this movie when I was a kid. I guess it came out when I was about 11, so I probably did not see it in the theater. I don't remember actually the first time I saw it. I know that it was part of that canon of John Hughes films that we all saw repeatedly at slumber parties.
And quoted.
And quoted all the time. And I don't know if you had slumber parties when you were young, but I used to have a ton of slumber parties for birthdays. And every birthday that I would go to or that I would have, we'd usually watch a John Hughes movie. That was like pretty much, required.
I went to the boys' slumber parties, so we would watch horror movies and Die Hard. Which I was into. No, that was cool.
But yeah, so it's, what I'm interested. I would be interested to hear what Travis has to say about this actually, because he watched it. He hadn't watched it when he was a young person, right? Like he watched it sort of first time now.
Do you want to? Right? Do you want to be part of this?
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, here's the thing. When you say when I watched it, the first time I watched it was 10 years ago when Dylan and I started dating. So I didn't have an attachment to it. I knew the characters. I knew a lot of the kids from the Breakfast Club. That's my more my touchstone with them. And this one was kind of like, I enjoyed it, but it was also like, this is kind of creepy and kind of weird. I did not have strong feelings about the movie when we watched it. I mean, I thought it was fun, but I also saw it as problematic. I mean, like the date rape and, the stereotypes, especially around Asian stereotypes. So it was kind of, it was a little cringe, but it also made me wish that we could go back to that time where we could like play with it. It's like when we watched Parenthood and there was like a school shooting.
Wow.
It's like stuff that doesn't hold, that at the time worked, but does not work now. And that's my take on it, and I'll go back off mute because this is you guys, this show.
Thank you.
Introduced all the stuff that I want to talk about.
So yeah, when I saw it more recently, obviously a lot of things stood out, as being very problematic. The reason why I wondered what Travis was thinking is just because I think when you see these things for the first time, you're like looking at it from our more woke personalities, and back then, I did actually think that it was racist, I guess, against Asians, or I thought it was mean, a little mean-spirited. I don't know if I thought it was racist when I was 11, but I definitely thought that the whole part about the exchange student was racist. I didn't pick up on the date rape thing, though, but I definitely I was like, what? Watching it this time, like, that isn't cool.
Yeah,
and also, like, I can't believe how far it went. Like, I forgot that they actually did have sex. And yeah, I guess you don't see Anthony Michael Hall when he was that age and that size as being like date rapey, but it technically is date rape. She was totally drugged, right?
Yeah. And if for those who haven't seen the movie in a while, it is very date rapey. And we're going to assume everyone's seen this movie, right?
Yeah.
And, well, let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
Right after the credits, she says, and I'm going to get a guy and a Trans Am. And her friend says, a black guy? And the movie doesn't really stop from there. And I think even back then, it was pretty off base. But let's hear what Siskel said in the next clip 7, and then we can talk, because I do see where they are coming from, especially reviewing this in 1984. But let's hear Siskel talk about the good things about this movie.
Uh-huh.
I'll tell you this, I think it's an excellent film, and I think you have some good criticisms. It has a very accurate sense in detail about the physical things of being a kid. Mm-hmm. His T-shirt was out when he was dancing. Mm-hmm. The T-shirt, his shirt was out. Uh-huh. He thought that was cool or neat. And obviously it's sloppy, looks like a jerk. Mm-hmm. But it has that sense. It also has the interior detail, which is that every kid, even the most popular ones, are insecure. If you're a teenager, you're insecure. I don't care how successful you are. And it has that sense too. It's a very fine picture.
I love that he zeroes in on the shirt, because there's so much fashion stuff in this movie. I'm like, okay, that's what you picked up on, but that's cool. So I'm thinking of Porky's. I'm thinking of all the Porky sequels. I'm thinking that Porky's came out in 1981, I believe, and was a huge sleeper success. It was one of the top movies of that year. And that movie really is dreadful and just has the problematic stuff without the more realistic dialogue and the better performances. Yeah. And then you had a rash of these teen movies. You also had Friday the 13th and all the slasher movies. So if we think about 1984 as being a really low point for teens in movies, especially when they were really popular, I can totally see how this movie did feel like a breath of fresh air and actually did course correct a lot of what the time was just about, like, tits.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that I don't quite understand why the director had to include all of those cracks. To me, like, they take from it. I mean, if they had taken out that part where they talk about the black Trans Am, also they say the F word at some point, and the R word, I noticed. And then, of course, all of the stuff about their exchange student. They, like, at one point they call him that weird Chinese guy in Mike's room. They said you'll have to burn the sheets after he leaves.
I know, it's really terrible.
And then at one point another joke was, I have to sleep under a Chinaman named after a duck's dong. Like, it's like so over the top. I can't even for 84.
Even for 84, and I was wondering how this was received then. And Roger Ebert's print review is kind of defensive, because it's about because he's saying it goes against the type, and this Asian guy is actually a party animal. And the actor, Jetty Watanabe, he said at the time that he felt like this was pushing back against the shy, timid Asian stereotype.
I guess that's maybe true. Like,
yeah, but then there was outcry against it. And Janet Maslin, she was the critic for the New York Times, said, and when the movie goes too far, as it does with a stupid subplot about a sex-crazed Oriental exchange student, or a running gag about a young woman in a body brace, at least it manages to bounce back relatively soon thereafter. So this was problematic at the time, and I don't want this whole conversation to be about how problematic this movie is, but it kind of has to be because it's punching down.
Yeah, and it's not just the characters who are doing that, which would be realistic, because I mean, people were and are very racist in high school. I mean, the banter that goes on even still, I'm surprised by what my middle schoolers say even to this day. It's just crazy. But the fact is that it's the movie itself that's actually making these jokes, and I don't know. It's
a deal breaker, right?
It's a deal breaker. I mean, it was a charming film to me back in the day. I did love certain parts. I mean, I loved the movie. I loved certain parts about it. I'll tell you the things I loved.
Yes, there's a lot to love before we continue bashing on it.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think the end scene is wonderful. It's very romantic, very sweet when they're sitting on the table and he's giving her the cake. Also, it does capture...
Yes, and...
What?
When I finished watching it this time, I was so... Yeah, I used to love that part too, but now I'm like, well, I hope he doesn't barter her for panties like he did his last girlfriend.
Right, yeah. I know. I thought he was so cute too, like back in the day.
Oh my God, he's such a fox. He is such a stone cold fox.
He is. He's so cute.
Michael Scheffling, he left acting to go be a woodworker.
Yeah.
Because we were always like, what happened to the sexiest guy ever in the history of movies? Because he really can get it.
And he's 63, which is hard to believe.
I mean, especially since we're 29.
I know.
Weird.
It's so weird how other people age.
I know.
Yeah, and I also really I did think that it captured, like they were saying, like a feeling of what it's like to be a teenager, or kind of like the more realistic look of teenagers. They're all slightly flawed looking, which is real. Molly Ringwald is gorgeous and beautiful in a very ethereal way in this movie. But, some of the side characters are kind of geeky, and it definitely captured that. I mean, even the girl with spina bifida, which is what I'm thinking she had, the one with the brace. I mean, there was always that kid who was, had one of those braces. Unfortunately, they had to make her the butt of the joke.
I know.
I do appreciate the being seen part of it. Although, did you notice there's not any Black people in this movie?
Yes, I was going to bring that up too, which makes the racist stuff that much worse.
Yeah.
But with that character too, I just want to say it's Joan Cusack who makes a meal out of this, and that scene when she's dancing on the dance floor, it still gets me every time, even though it might be wrong. They talk a little bit more about the characters, so let's play the clip.
When you look at the character name, the geek there, Anthony Michael Hall, he's not the kind of geek that you'd see in Porky's, where he's got zits all over and thick glasses like I wear. I think I was a geek when I was a freshman in high school. I'll tell you something else. Yeah. Every freshman kid thinks he's a geek. And so this movie understands you don't have to be weird. You just have to share the general feeling of being an outsider and being insecure. This movie knows about that.
Here's a difference also between Porky's, and that is that the director of this film, John Hughes, writer-director, likes every one of his characters. I don't think the people that made Porky's or its many ripoffs like teenagers. This guy likes teenagers, and it shows through the fine filmmaking.
One footnote, this movie is not merely positive and wholesome in the way we've said, but it's also funny and entertaining. We don't want to make it sound so holy that nobody will go see it.
Okay, I don't.
So funny, it's the positive, wholesome, because you do see that in some scenes, but it just shows how glaringly we all missed the warning signs, and it just makes me think about movies like this, especially watching them as a kid. You did get the I feel seen, right? And like, oh, these are kids and they feel like teenagers in The Breakfast Club, which we'll talk about next week. such a cultural touchstone, not just for me, but for our cohort of kids. And that there was something really influential about John Hughes kind of reflecting how we felt, but also watching these movies, taking cues from these movies, kind of about how to feel, and all the fucked up shit that came with that.
Yeah.
Like I remember quoting Long Duck Dong, and it was really funny, and I can still quote it all. And it wasn't until rewatching it 10 years ago, it was like, oh, some of these you really can't go home again.
Yeah, and what Nabi went on to make like a ton of movies in that kind of era, like Volunteers and Gremlins, or Gremlins 2, and the new batch, Alfie, 2 for the Money. He also did like voice work later on for the Mulan films, but it was part of the culture at the time to be just like super stereotypical about this very token Asian person who would always appear in these 80s movies.
Yeah, and rewatching it, I thought it would have been such a fun choice if he did that was kind of more of an act that he was putting on for the grandparents, and then he was just kind of more aware of putting on the act of a stereotype rather than the movie making him a stereotype.
Right. Yeah.
Rewatching it this time, because I was just kind of laser focused on the treatment of women and the bipolar nature of this movie, that it has such a strong central character in Samantha and Molly Ringwald, who is really great in these movies. That's another thing, watching these years later, you see how natural and, you say, kind of ethereal, but also has the groundedness.
Yeah.
But then you have Carolyn, and watching Stone Cold Fox Jake Ryan in the party scene, I'm like, wait, he's sober. He's making a conscious choice to loan her out. It's real bad, guys.
Yeah. I have a question to put out to our listening audience. I never experienced high school the way that a lot of these movies portray it, like with the party scene. Like, I have never been to one of those parties. I had never been to one of those parties where people just destroyed someone's house, like in a weird science kind of way. Like, watching it now, that really disturbed me. Why in the world would they do that to their parents' house? How much hatred do they have for their parents that they would allow their friends to do that? Like, so much damage, even structural damage. It's just nuts.
That's something I remember thinking at the time, I remember thinking now. Like, how do you even start beginning to clean that up? But I think part of it's too is that he's really rich and he has money.
Yeah. Like, hence the Rolls Royce, getting kind of messed up as well.
Yeah, and he doesn't care and goes and on the whole part about it's kind of sweet that he's like getting her undies back to give them back to her. Oh man, oh man.
What a gallant gentleman.
And then at the end, he's surprised to find them in the parking lot. I'm like, but what did you think was going to happen?
Yeah, and when Anthony Michael Hall wakes up with the girl, and he's like, did we do it?
Yeah.
He's like, I'm pretty sure. Did I enjoy it? Of course I did.
And that's supposed to be kind of a sweet moment.
Right, she's like,
but again,
I might have. Well, at least he asked her if she enjoyed it,
right?
Like,
which is a step up from Porky's and all those movies that they don't even, the women probably don't even talk in those movies, right? So this is one small step for representation, but also a bunch of steps back.
I want to ask: do you think that we have gotten too sensitive about things like that? There's a part of me, the more sex positive person, is like, why does it have to be such a big deal? Why is someone losing their virginity or having sex in high school? Why does it have to be such a big deal if it's done safely and people, I mean, that's the part that's, unclear, but of course that wouldn't be very romantic to say, did we wear a condom? And
she does, she is on the pill.
Yeah, she is on the pill. That's true. But I mean, it is kind of truthful that people do have sex, and sometimes they have sex when they're drunk, and that's kind of realistic. Are we getting a little too
Prudish?
parental about these things?
Puritanical?
Yeah, puritanical about it.
Well, I think this is when we kind of have to talk about it in two different ways, because I do think that we do get puritanical and there's a lot of self-censorship going on, but then to revisit this movie and then you see the movie's attitude towards this behavior is very different. And again, I go back to what messages we were taking. And like you, I never went to these parties, and I didn't even date in high school. So this was all very anthropological for me. These kind of movies to be like, oh, what are the normal kids doing? And there was some safety and pleasure in feeling like the not normal ones, like Samantha in this movie.
That's why I'd love it if some normal people would just make some comments on our faces. Because
I don't think normal people are listening to this podcast.
Probably not, but I really would like to get from the normals out there. Please tell me.
I went to I don't know. I went to ragers in college, and there was no destruction of property.
Right. And I've had some ragers when I was in college, and no one made any like permanent damage to my house.
I know, we were good kids at the end of the day.
Yeah.
But this is also, right, then we get into like, well, this is a movie, and this is hyper real, and this is taking everything to 11, and this is a farce.
Right.
And that, in the question of farce, you can push boundaries, and I am all for pushing boundaries. I'm all for breaking taboos.
Yeah.
But
and realism over just trying to like send some sort of contrived message. But my big question is, do we just completely get rid of this out of our canon, like because it has all these problematic parts, or is there still something that makes it worthwhile? Like, in my opinion, I wouldn't recommend it necessarily to any teens today, unless they want to dissect it and how racist it is. But it's like, do we completely throw the baby out with the bathwater? Is this like a Gone with the Wind kind of thing where there's still a lot of merit to it, but we can't forget like how racist or is it historically significant? Like, what do you think?
I think it's that latter camp of, I would not recommend this to teenagers. I don't think they would like it. I think it's like Rebel Without a Cause now. It's that kind of historical. I do think there's merit. You know what? And Siskel and Ebert are right. A lot of the dialogue is really good. But I think for me, it's a thumbs down because there's just too much baggage. And I think it's revisiting these movies and deciding when the baggage is too much. I think it is like Gone with the Wind, where you have to give it a lot of context because it is, the movie's kind of reckless. And this is from someone who doesn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and, is still very nostalgic for the great lines of dialogue in this movie, but it's too tone deaf, I think. I don't know. I mean, I do know. Is this, look, at the end of the day, what are we doing here? Is this one to revisit? And this is kind of a no, unless you want to do it academically, which who wants to do that except for you and me?
Or in that make fun of it kind of way. Like, I think I would not recommend our age group to watch it unless they want to do it from an anthropological standpoint to see like what 80s films were like back then in terms of race and gender.
But I don't think all movies were
like teen movies. I mean, teen movies definitely had that kind of running trope. Those kinds of running tropes. And you brought this up earlier. You can't do all this and then have no other people of color in this movie. Right. So I guess my thing is, do I recommend it to people our age to revisit where they are going to basically probably ruin their good feelings that they had of the movie? And this is something I have a little bit of trouble with watching a lot of the movies we watch now because I have such fond memories of so many of them. Maybe it's better to preserve those memories rather than analyze the shit out of them so that the magic goes away.
Well, What are we doing here, Miranda?
I know. So, but at the same
we're
time,
watching it so you don't have to, listeners.
Yes, we're taking it for the team. But maybe it's actually good to recommend it to our age so that the magic is kind of dissolved, because that magic was built on a lot of painful shit towards other people that, you know, are non-Caucasian, you know, and or male, you know, for that matter. But that said, I kind of do like the idea of being able to go back and look at these movies and make fun of them, knowing what we know now. And there is some benefit to that, I think.
There is, but this movie's not sincere enough to make fun of. I don't think it works as camp. Wait, Travis?
What I just want to jump in because I spoke earlier. I think it's actually very interesting from an anthropological standpoint, what you're saying about going back and watching it, Miranda, because we've all learned and grown a lot in these last 40 years about society and systemic racism and things like that. And for us to go back and watch something like this that was beloved for us, and to see it now and kind of have this like look of horror on your face, like, ooh, I laughed at that. Ooh, that was wrong. To go back and look at that, I think it is a very interesting thing to shape how you look at entertainment now as far as representation. I do think there is some benefit, and you can watch it and laugh at it, but you can also cringe and look at yourself and be like, wow, look how much I've changed since I watched this movie. So
That's
from that point of view, I think that's where I think this movie does have a space in today's cultural landscape.
Yeah, no, it's totally true.
No, and to watch it with someone who's never seen it with fresh eyes, I did feel implicated. And I don't always feel implicated, especially in 90s. You know, when we talked about Philadelphia, we were like, well, we knew homophobia was wrong back then.
Right.
So it's interesting to also be humbled with movies like this and be like, okay, yeah, this is how we've grown and maybe how we haven't. I'm desperate to find out what stuff is going on now that's gonna feel real bad in 40 years.
Yeah.
When we're still 29.
Right, exactly. I think Travis brings up a great point. Like it's about the self-reflection. Like to think that we enjoyed this and we overlooked all of that at the time. And also it made me
we were children. We didn't even know what to overlook. And that's
what,
you know.
You think though that just the basic standards of decency towards humans, which children should know at that age, would have said, like, no, it's not cool to make fun of people in that way. But I don't know. I think we have become way more aware, and that is a natural thing that happens to everybody. Everyone, when you become more aware, you do better, right? You become what is interesting to me is how much we can dismiss movies that are older than this for all their sexism and racism, and how you and I are having a harder time dismissing this because it's a part of our generation.
Mm-hmm.
But like if I look back at old movies that I still love to this day and watching, like Maltese Falcon, for instance, super homophobic. I mean, a lot of those movies were just sexist and homophobic and racist, you know, but somehow I'm like, ha ha ha, you know, like isn't it funny how we were like that in those days? And I still appreciate them for what they are.
Yeah. And I think the question is there enough to appreciate it? And with 16 Candles, I just don't know if there is. And it's, with the homophobic stuff, that's the stuff I don't mind the most because I feel like I can give it a pass, you know?
Like you have that right.
I
mean, some things, it's so obvious in watching it now that were just so gratuitous. What's the woman's name? I'm going to have to like remind myself of her name, but the woman who is the very small woman who's at
Zelda Rubinstein.
Yeah. So the Zelda Rubinstein character is, why is she in it? If not to just be like gawking in a sort of freak showish kind of way. Like if this woman doesn't have any purpose really for this film other than to just look at her and have her in it.
Yeah.
At least in Poltergeist, she had an actual purpose. This one is just like sort of a nothing thing, and it makes me kind of angry at the film. Like, what?
Yeah,
God.
and I don't know if he likes all his characters, like Siskel and Ebert said.
Right.
But he does like Samantha.
He does. And Molly Ringwald is very charming, and I mean, I remember my parents liking this movie. They didn't mind it when I would want to watch it incessantly.
Well, there's a lot of charm about it, and there's a reason why it was a touchstone.
Yeah, and it definitely has that 80s patina. I mean, it's
the music. We'll talk about this more with the other movies. Oh, these soundtracks.
Yes,
are glorious,
lovely. They bring you back to a time and place.
And I did want to mention this because watching it, I'm like, how was this not rated R?
Oh.
Because it's got nudity and it's got language and it's got date rape. So interestingly, this came out May 4th, 1984. The first PG-13 movie was 3 months later, August 4th, Red Dawn. This movie was going to be rated R. They appealed and got the PG. So this movie was on the cusp at the time. And I'm sure was one of the movies that made them feel more confident to install the PG-13 rating.
Yeah, it's so funny to think of that now, like that this would be a PG movie with all what's in it. You know, it definitely
would be either R or PG. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember looking at Airplane recently and thinking, this is PG?
I know. All right.
So I'm gonna give it a thumbs down. Because I do think that, oh God, I don't know. You speak, Dylan.
I'll make it easier for you. I'm going to give this a thumbs down. As much as I love this movie, I need to, because watching it again is not the same experience, and there's not enough to, compartmentalize, you know? It's a little too flagrant. Yeah.
Even the Jake character can't save it.
No, he's so foxy.
He's so
foxy. But
I almost want to give it a thumbs up for that.
I know I do too, but then thumbs down because he does give away his girlfriend to get the girl's panties back.
Yeah. Molly Ringwald's lips also are so like beautiful, which I almost would recommend the movie just because of that. She's so gorgeous in that. But you know what? I'm going to take a stand as well. I'm going to just say thumbs down. I would say watch it if you want to, again, MST3K it, if you want to.
But it's not it's not MST3K because I don't think you're making fun of it. It's just more kind of being like, oh, it's kind of too sobering, I think, to MST3K.
You could MST3K though. You could like say, oh, here's the part where they're gonna have the gong.
Yeah.
What's the Asian guy? And I don't know.
There's so much to watch. Let's reserve these recommendations for. We'll see what happens with Pretty in Pink.
Watchable movies. Actually, watchable movies. Yeah, it's gonna ruin your feeling of that time of that movie when you watched it when you were actually 15, 16. So don't watch it.
As much as it pains me to say, 2 thumbs down on a John Hughes movie.
Yep. So our next John Hughes film is Pretty in Pink. It comes a couple of years after 16 Candles, which was Molly Ringwald's first major role. This is 1986, another teenage romantic comedy, and definitely identified many of the people who are in it as the Brat Pack. So this film was written by John Hughes and directed by Howard Deutsch. Stars Molly Ringwald, Harry Dean Stanton, John Cryer, Annie Potts, James Spader, Andrew McCarthy. God, I have a lot to say about James Spader in this. So let's hear what Siskel says. He's going to introduce the film.
Pretty in Pink is the latest film from the pen, or maybe the word processor, of John Hughes, who has given us such funny and sensitive films as 16 Candles and The Breakfast Club. But then there was last year's terribly disappointing Weird Science, and sad to say now, another flimsy film, Pretty in Pink, detailing the problems of a poor girl who feels rejected, and she is rejected by the many wealthy kids who dominate her high school. The story gets rolling after one of the rich kids does ask her for a date. But her loyal, puppy dog-like friend, who also is an outcast, tells her that she's being a traitor to their cause by considering the date. Molly Ringwald plays poor Andy, stuck now between an old friend and a new flame.
I should remind people that Deutsch actually was married to Leah Thompson, because he also did Some Kind of Wonderful, and he met her on the set of that.
Oh,
so I thought that was a good little, like, fun tidbit. I love Some Kind of Wonderful. I don't care what anyone says. It still holds up. It's wonderful.
I know. I remember you beating that drum even back in the day.
Yep. It sounds like back in '86, he didn't really like it that much.
Now, that's a sad scene to watch because Molly Ringwald is acting her heart out there, and she's very appealing, but all in the service of what really is a dumb movie. The story is so predictable. Off again, on again relationship. And John Cryer, who we saw in the first scene, who plays Ducky, usually her lapdog friend doing kind of goofy little things, is truly annoying in a one-note performance played, I think, much too loudly. And as for the portrayal of the rich wasps in this film, you saw one of them hiding there in the little hallway with his little jacket and shirt. That portrayal is as racist as some black men are saying lately the color purple is. I think that Molly Ringwald is a wonderful young actress, but she is totally wasted, in my opinion, in Pretty in Pink.
OMG. No talk about racism in 16 Candles, but now racist against wasps? Talk about language that is not held up. Oi. Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah, you got to really watch the racism against wasps. You know,
yeah, that was really problematic in the 80s.
It
was very Reagan-y, doesn't it?
That was definitely a trope in the 80s with teen movies. It seemed to be really important to talk about, like, both sides of the tracks, which I mean, maybe this is my privilege, but I don't remember that being like a huge deal breaker in high school for me. Like, and I went to a school in a very working class area, very, very integrated, very diverse population of students. I don't remember us ever like having that much problems or having even like words like Richie and stuff like that.
We grew up in a Bay Area suburb, so we might not be the best people to talk about this.
That's true. But I went to a school in Concord, and it was, you know, it was and is a very, it's different than I think the schools that you went to, because yours were definitely more affluent. I think we had a lot of poor kids in our school. Yeah. I just don't remember there being that divide between rich and poor. It was more like popular and not popular, and the popular kids, maybe there was more rhyme and reason to it than I thought when it came to like people who had money or whatnot, but no one ever acknowledged it in such a blatant way as they do in this movie.
Yeah, I think part of that is rags to riches stories, and also feels very 80s Reagan consumerism, money. That was a hallmark of that decade.
Yeah. And Howard Hughes was a Republican. Did you know that?
Nope, that doesn't really surprise me, kind of rewatching these movies, I must say.
Yeah.
Because he is into money is the happy ending.
Yeah.
You know, and yuppies were a thing. I think this is really about yuppies, right? And about the aspiration to become a yuppie, which is a through line of a lot of movies in the 80s.
Yeah, he's not, in a way, he's not very complimentary towards the quote-unquote richies. I mean, they're kind of seen as sort of shallow and blasé about their money and, you know, not that all that attractive of people, which is so strange because James Spader, oh my God, he is just so hot.
I knew this would come up.
Like, why is he the bad guy? He's cuter than anybody. He's cuter than any of them. I mean, a lot of people say, you know, she should have ended up with the John Cryer Ducky character, and that it was totally silly, like that she ends up, you know, with Andrew McCarthy.
Well, this goes back to he might make the Richies the villains, but as we just saw in 16 Candles and this movie, the happy ending is she ends up with the hot rich guy.
But she should have ended up with James Spader instead. He was a lot more interesting.
You just...
This boy, you could have really changed
that
him.
And Robert Downey Jr.
I feel like Andrew McCarthy was nothing. He was just a nothing character. Like, what do we even know about this guy? He's just a total dud. Whereas at least with James Spader, we kind of got something to work with.
You just love him so
Right?
much. I still don't know what you think of this movie. Should we hear Ebert talk about it? And then,
Yeah.
because I have my thoughts.
I like this movie. I
Wow.
thought that its heart was in the right place. I like John Cryer's performance as Ducky because I felt he was a case study for the same kind of kid I was in high school, the class clown. You know, the pretty girl won't go out with you because you're the captain of the football team. You talk her into going out with you. And I found that this movie was so accurate in being able to remember how those sorts of things went on.
Roger, I know about being the class clown because I was one of those too.
I imagine you were.
Yeah, but Roger, that's why we're both in the same job, oddly enough. But I'll tell you this, I was never over at the girl's house every single day lying on her bed going crazy. The class clown hangs back a lot farther. Come on, you didn't do that either. You didn't do that either, and I know you do it because you would say now if you did it.
Were you a stalker in high school? Say it, Roger. Say it. I appreciate that they don't talk a lot about their personal histories, and I kind of like how they both acknowledge that they both thought that they were the class clowns.
Yeah, it brought out their kind of what they were like as teens and stuff. It's cute because it's, for as much as they fight on air, they really did love each other in real life. They actually had a lot of respect for each other.
They had a lot of respect for each other, but they also were very, very competitive.
Yes, definitely.
And you can hear that here.
I mean, there's definitely a fantasy component to this movie in a lot of ways, like the fantasy of having this adoring guy, you know, this person who just adores you and loves you, and you kind of just take him for granted. And I think a much better ending would have been for her to finally realize that, you know, she had this fantastic guy right in front of her that loved her and treated her with, you know, just as the queen that she should have been treated as. But I think that was going to be the original ending, actually, was that she was going to end up with John Cryer.
Well, that's the wrong ending, too. Yeah. I'm with Siskel. I think Ducky's annoying in this movie. And I think it should have ended with a little Kelly Taylor 90210 moment. I choose me.
Oh.
And not be with anybody because they're all kind of annoying in this movie. Okay. I do not have the personal attachment that I do to 16 Candles and other John Hughes movies and other 80s movies and other 80s teen movies. I saw this after the fact in college. I think my snootiness had started to kick in a little bit. So I'd only seen this once before. This was not, I did not pop this in the VCR all the time like I did with some of these other movies.
Interesting. I did. I loved this one. And I kind of still do. I know that's so terrible. But I acknowledge its flaws, but I do think it has style. I think I still really enjoy the Annie Potts character a lot. She was kind of this kind of, I would think of her as like an idol. She just dressed so cool and she was so like.
She's doing Cyndi Lauper.
Yeah, and I loved Cyndi Lauper.
I did too, yeah.
I loved her and I loved Molly Ringwald's clothes in this, except for the dress, the vinyl dress.
Do you want to talk about the dress now or should we wait?
Well, you know, Molly Ringwald herself talks about in interviews recently. She's been talking about that dress.
Really?
Yeah, she did not like it.
It's a really bad dress.
It's a really bad dress. I mean,
you don't even get the money shot of the beautiful dress.
Yeah, I mean, I think she says in a recent interview that if you can look good in that dress, like you can look good in anything. So I mean, the fact that she pulled it off is a great tribute to her figure and also just her as a person. Yeah, that's not a flattering dress, although she did make it herself, so I guess it's kind of realistic.
She does have style in this movie. It was really interesting watching this back to back with 16 Candles and seeing how they basically took the set design from her bedroom in 16 Candles and made it even more pink.
Yeah, definitely.
This movie to me does have a little bit of like playing the hits from 16 Candles, from The Breakfast Club, maybe some kind of Wonderful. It does lean into the romantic comedy more.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's hard since I don't have an affection. It did feel a little bit warmed over from the other 80s movies. And Ducky, I'm with Siskel. First of all, one of his first lines, he runs in those two girls in the hall and he goes, "I want to impregnate you by the holidays." I'm like, great. Here we go again. Can we get through one of these movies without No, we can't.
Here's a funny
and he felt like Ferris Bueller. She felt like Samantha. They just felt kind of like characters from other John Hughes movies to me.
So, fun fact: Charlie Sheen was considered for the role of Blaine, the Andrew McCarthy character. But Molly Ringwald convinced people that she didn't want him. She wanted Robert Downey Jr., which that would have been a different thing, huh? I would have
that would have been a different movie for you. James
Why
Spader
did you not
versus
consider me?
James Spader versus Robert Downey Jr. You would have been like, why doesn't this end up in a throuple?
Yeah, he would have been great as the Blaine character. I think the Robert Downey Jr. And I probably would have. I think back in the day, I did actually root for her to get with Andrew McCarthy because I was easily like bought and sold and told that this was the person I'm supposed to like be rooting for. But in retrospect and watching it later on, and in reality, I think she should have ended up with Ducky or the James Spader character. Now in my,
she should have gotten an internship and like dated a college guy who's cool.
Maybe. Was she all that? Well, I guess she was very studious. Yeah.
They talk. I was impressed they are studying the Russian Revolution in high school. I'm like, I don't think we got that far.
No, we never did.
Let's listen to more of their argument about what goes on in high school. I thought this was funny, clip 4.
This is 1986, and people hang out together a little bit more than they did in 1956.
Not like that.
I felt that the whole story of this movie, sure, it's predictable. She wants to go out with a guy.
Real predictable.
He's stuck up, then he asks her out, then he doesn't ask her out. That's what goes on in high school.
Roger,
I think more hearts are broken over the senior prom than anything else that happens.
There's no question, but here's the way to play that. We've seen dozens of senior prom movies. This thing offers nothing fresh, just as you're saying, lots of senior prom movies. I would have had this woman reject the rich guy and go back to her own culture and say, you rich people,
okay, but I got this for you, Gene. That would have been just as predictable. It would have just simply been a different ending.
Different ending and unpredictable.
Really great. You ought to get your own word processor.
I do have one. I'm going to use it.
Ooh.
Yeah. That's exactly what actually they originally filmed it as, is that she ends up with John Cryer. But then it was booed at their test showing, and they had to change the ending. They had to actually rewrite the ending, and they'd already finished production, but they had to add on. And actually, the last couple scenes are from a sound studio, and they were different. You might even notice if you're like really watching.
Yeah, tell us.
That the hair is different. That I think they had to wear like wigs and things like that to like bring their hair back.
A reshoot wig.
Yes, a reshoot wig.
My friend Will, if you're listening, he can always tell a reshoot wig from a mile away.
I think that they also did take into account the classism, and thinking that if they made her end up with John Cryer, that would be basically saying that rich and poor can't get together, which is probably why they made Some Kind of Wonderful, which she does end up, spoiler alert, she ends up with a fellow quote unquote poor person.
But I feel like Siskel did sniff it out, because the ending does feel tacked on and not really earned. Although that last song is great. The soundtrack, once again, all these songs are bangers. They're so good.
Yeah.
It might be worth revisiting just for the soundtrack alone. I also love that watching these movies in our 40s-ish now.
Yes. I love
Dylan. That Roger Ebert was so authoritarian of what goes on in high school when he was in his 40s. Like, you don't know. All you know is from the movies.
I mean, apparently the movie was actually filmed with the idea that it was going to end with her with Ducky.
Well, it feels like it should, but
everything leads up to that. Yeah. Except for then she ends up with him. And then they kind of tacked on this other girl, like winking at the Ducky character. Oh, don't feel too bad for him. He ends up with a hobby.
Yeah. Is he going to impregnate her by the holidays?
I do really love the scene where he gets shoved into the girl's bathroom and he's like, what? Like, the sink is clean? You've got doors on the stalls.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. That's classic.
And the weird part when he does the lip sync. Just that felt very Ferris Bueller-y. I don't know. I think there's other ones to watch before this. I do want to say, especially watching these two movies, Molly Ringwald takes kind of the same character, but she does bring something different to each role. And that's kind of my biggest takeaway from this episode is she did find the nuances in her different characters. I really like her.
Yeah, me too. She's wonderful. Yeah, I think I'm gonna disagree with you on this one. I do see the flaws. I see the issues that the movie has. It definitely has that trope that's very annoying, where they just completely stereotype the classes. Also, some of the things that they get away with didn't seem very realistic in high school. Like the James Spader character, he spits on the floor after he gets in a fight, and like he doesn't get in trouble.
Well, he also was really old, and his clothes, they're really old.
I never saw anyone wear those clothes to high school. I'm sorry.
We were with the Richies, I guess.
I guess not.
Yeah, those clothes really stuck out.
Nobody wore blazers on the weekday.
No.
That just wasn't. Don Johnson, was not like infiltrating into the teen crowd. No.
Yeah.
And also, he wouldn't have been able to smoke and, act like I don't know. I kind of like it in a sort of making fun of it sort of way, but it's so unrealistic. But that said, with all of those flaws, plus, all the stereotypes about wasps. I mean, I'm sorry, wasps out there.
The racism against wasps.
The racism against wasps is high. There's a high racism. If you're a wasp out there, this movie might trigger you.
Trigger warning for wasps.
Yes.
And Richies.
The Richies.
All right, well, it's a thumbs down for me. I'm with Siskel on this one. It, especially without the affection, I'm just not on the John Hughes tip like I thought I was going to be when we started talking about this episode. I'm kind of surprised.
When we embarked on this endeavor?
Yeah.
I'm going to give it a thumbs up just because I think it's still...
I knew you would.
It's charm. Yeah, you know what I'm like.
We will find a movie starring James Spader that you will not like, but I don't know.
Oh, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult because, Sex, Lies, and Videotape was the pinnacle.
I know.
And of course, The Office. He was great. Yep. He wasn't as sexy in The Office, but that's another story. But no, I think that this movie still holds its charm. The music is really, it just takes you back. I love the costumes. Annie Potts is wonderful. James Spader is in it. I mean, John Cryer, it's funny, like little shout out to my friend Joyce. She actually sold something to him on eBay, which I thought was like this cool little claim.
So random.
I know, we're totally random, but yeah. So yeah, thumbs up for me.
Thumbs down for me. So that concludes part 1 of our Brat Pack.
Can I just add that there was a few early little cameos. Gina Gershon played one of the friends of.
I know, I didn't realize that.
Yep, and then of course Andrew Dice Clay, who was the bouncer.
Of course,
I don't know if you remember that. Yep. Yeah, he was with his the lighter and whatnot, being his Andrew Dice Clayist.
Yeah, not enough for my thumb. Annie Potts is MVP. She's really good.
Yeah.
All right. So I can't wait to talk about Breakfast Club and St. Elmo's Fire, which I do not remember. So this is kind of going to be a first watch for me. I really don't remember that movie. But
I remember it, but not.
We'll talk about it next week.
Yeah, we'll watch it. We'll talk about it next week.
Brat Pack, Part 2. Thanks for listening to Back at the Movies. I'm your host, Dylan Wilcox.
And I'm your host, Miranda Broder. You can find us on social and Letterboxd at BATMPOD. That stands for Back at the Movies Pod. We'd like to thank our producer, Travis Bone, and Jay Edwards for the original music.
If you enjoyed our podcast, please give us 2 thumbs up by rating us 5 stars on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere you listen. That's our show, and until next time, the balcony is still closed.